Hi, it's Sarah from Dolls and Daydreams, and today I'm going to be talking about the ladder stitch. It's possibly one of the most important stitches you are ever going to learn in doll making. It's fantastic for two reasons. One, it's super sturdy, and two, well, it's invisible. So let's get started. For our tools, we're going to need some extra stuffing, a stuffing tool. I like to use a paintbrush. The bristly ends are fabulous for holding onto stuffing, and the other end is really good for maneuvering the stuffing around inside the doll. You're going to need some needle and thread. Here I'll be using a really dark thread. I want you to be able to see these stitches, but I really highly recommend that you match your thread to the fabric you're going to be sewing up. So in this example, I will be using a red and white stripe. If I was going to be closing this professionally, I would be using a white, light colored thread. The lighter the color your thread is, the more likely it will become invisible down the road. And then we're going to need a small pair of scissors and of course your dolly with their big hole in their side. Now, stuffing holes are usually located on the side of the doll. If your dolly has an outfit already on, for example, the doll I'm using here is going to be Snow White. She will have like a little dress area down here and the side of her body will be straight. Some of the dolls and some of the animals are going to have a rounded side to their body. So obviously you will be using more of a seam allowance in a rounded motion. Now, other stuffing dolls will be with an opening along the bottom. It is exactly the same way of stitching up, except you're just going to be catching the legs with the stitches also. All of my patterns come with a step-by-step photo tutorial that will show this, but I thought it was about time we did a video as well. So the ladder stitch, it's just like the name, it's a ladder. So as we're going to stitch, we've got to think of the rungs of a ladder. And so we need each rung to get to the top. So I have a little video for you to see, but I just want to quickly walk you through this with the diagram so you can understand exactly what we're doing. So after we hide our knot in the seam allowance, we're going to take a stitch over to the other side of your fabric, go up through the channel that we have created with our seam allowance, and then pull out your thread and over to the other side. So what you're doing is you're creating the second rung. You've already done the first, you created the second rung, and you're going to work your way up the hole. As you do this, you should think of it more like a corset, and eventually we will pull it and all of the threads will become nice and cinched together, and voila, the hole disappears. And so do your threads and the stitches, which is great. So without further ado, let's watch the video. Okay, so I am actually trimming the end of the thread really nicely and closely to my knot. This is a triple knot. You can do a double knot. You just don't want it to come out of your seam. Now that's my seam allowance that I've tucked in nicely. It's the standard 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I make sure that that's being adhered to on both sides of your fabric so that when you put it together, it's going to make a nice straight line, because that's the side of our dress that our dolly is wearing. So we want to continue that line on. Now it's a bit loose in the stuffing area, which is very normal, so I'm going to add a little bit more stuffing. You want to get it quite firm. It's actually much easier to use my trusty little paintbrush. The bristly end is great for maneuvering it around. Now when I put my seams together, stuff that last bit in, it's lovely and flat, and I can add my pins. Now I usually only add a couple of pins. I don't like them along the bottom. They really get in the way of your first stitch. I'll probably end up taking that out, I can't remember. Oh yeah, and I'm trimming away all the fluffy stuff because that really is annoying when you're trying to sew and you're sewing your stuffing into your stitches. You don't really want that. Okay, so now we're going to hide our knot. Yep, out comes that bottom pin. It's so annoying. Right, I'm going to pop my needle right underneath that seam allowance so that when I pull the thread through, the knot is hidden behind. You can stuff it in with your nail. Now it's nice and hidden away, and I'm going across and doing our first rung on the ladder. There was a bit more fluff. Let's get rid of that. So take your time, and you want to use only about 1/4 of an inch on your needle there. You can see I'm only going up by about 1/4 of an inch, and I'm going from side to side and making sure that both the seam allowances are nice and straight. You don't want a wibble in them because otherwise you'll get a big pucker when you pull the threads together. And you want to do, there it is, it's 1/4 of an inch. You want to do about 4 or 5 stitches. They can be really loose at this point. And we're almost there. I'd probably move that pin too, actually. Oh, and I'm going to. They really do get in the way, but at the same time, you do need them to be able to keep that seam nice and straight on both sides. Right, am I doing one more? I'm doing one more. Okay, one last stitch, and then we're going to be pulling it, as I mentioned earlier, like a little corset. And those black stitches are going to disappear. Okay, we're giving it a nice little tug. Wonderful, and I've just realized, oh, there is a gap at the bottom. Oh, that's annoying. Okay, so anyway, those stitches absolutely disappear, which is lovely. If you ever do that and realize there is a gap at the bottom, you can always go back and add a couple of little ladder stitches to that. The reason this is happening with this dolly is it's an old doll that I actually just opened up for this video, and I didn't check where the opening really ended and the machine stitches started. But as you can see, those stitches completely disappear. It doesn't matter I've used the black thread. That's what's so wonderful about the ladder stitch. You just softly, softly, loosely, loosely go up right to the end and then give it another pull, and those stitches will disappear. Right, I'm probably going to finish off soon, even though the doll hole isn't completely closed, just because I don't want this video going on forever for you. Am I going to start doing the knot right now? Okay, let's pull it. Okay, you can see a couple of those little black stitches. Those will all disappear if you're using the right colored thread, of course. Now, that seems lovely and straight. And now we're going to finish off with a knot. So you're going to do a large loop, and then before you pull that loop all the way through, you're going to thread your needle through the loop. That's what I've just done there. You're going to pull that down. So that becomes a knot right at the end of your thread. And then you're going to place your needle right into the seam and pull it out somewhere squidgy in the doll's body. Give it a bit of tension and then snip. And that thread will disappear inside of Dolly, and you've got a lovely side of your dolly that's all nice and secure and ready to be played with. Oh, lovely little Snow White. Okay, let's talk about a curved edge. Remember, this seam allowance has to reflect the curve in the side of your limb. It's exactly the same if it was the side of a curved dolly as well. Add a little bit of extra stuffing, pop your pin in. Now, honestly, I don't think I would use a pin normally with this. It just gets in the way of those first couple of stitches. But here we go again. I've hidden that knot. I'm going up 1/4 of an inch. And all the time I'm thinking curve, curve, curve. The last thing you want to do is make a straight section to a curved part, like a limb or the side of a body, because it will end up looking more dimpled and distorted really. So we're going up by 1/4 of an inch. Much easier to see in this video, but all the while I am holding it securely so that I know that I've got my seam allowance curving around. I'm not pulling it yet. Oh, now I'm going to give it maybe a little tug, and those stitches completely disappear. It's lovely. There we go. And we're just going to work our way up to the end. This was actually a limb for the rainbow babies. I don't know if any of you have made this dolly pattern up. It's adorable and much easier than it looks. Okay, and now you see that little stitch, there's a little white stitch. Now normally I would actually use that stitch to create my knot around. That's the tie-off knot stitch from my sewing machine. Oh, get rid of that fluff. I don't actually use that this time. That's my nice curve that I've kept with my seam allowance. I'm going to do a really large tie off so that you can actually see myself do that knot again. But you could do that around that one stitch and it completely becomes invisible. Get your needle right in that seam, come out somewhere else. See, it's right in the seam, pull it and it's gone. Lovely little arm. Let's get rid of that. Pull a little bit of tension and snip. Ta-da! And the arm is done and ready to attach to Dolly. Well, I hope that's helped you. Remember, practice makes perfect, and don't worry, take your time. It is always tricky learning a new stitch to begin with, and honestly, you're going to be so happy with how your dolls will turn out instead of using a rough whip stitch or your sewing machine. They will end up looking so professional using the ladder stitch. If you have enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up, leave me a comment, and of course, please subscribe. Take care and very happy sewing.